Thanks for checking out the Anchor Church podcast. If you want to know more about upcoming events, listen to past messages, or find out about our Connect groups, please download the app. Also, if you would like to fill out your information, click on the Connect button below. If this message has impacted you and you feel led to give and support us financially, please click on the Give button below this video. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
So, how's everybody's week been? Been a good week? Everybody's sun has been out all week. Praise Jesus. It might be springtime, they're saying. Polar vortexes or something not breaking up. I don't know. You people that are more smart than me understand it. But or you read the same things I do on the internet. Anyway, it's been awesome. My kids were outside just rolling around in the mud and I didn't even care. I'm like, the sun's out, you're outside, you're not driving me crazy, rolling all the mud you want. Just watch out for dog poop. And that's my life. And they did. It was good. But anyway, it has been awesome. I've been loving just what was going on. If anyone was here Friday night, we had the movie night, which was just super fun. Lots of families. Popcorn literally everywhere. You might find popcorn in your seat. Just grab that up to have a little snack during my sermon. It'll be good. But we had an awesome job, Lauren, through just a really great night. So hopefully we can do more of those. If you were here, it was awesome. We had our old screen from that we had set up at Southview. We set it up here, and it was straight up like a movie theater. It was awesome. Everyone just hung out, had a great time. But anyway, I'm excited. We have been in this series, and we're wrapping up this series. Man, I could preach on it. John was talking. I could preach on it longer. And I would love to give you resources if you want to go a little deeper with some of these thoughts and ideas. But I think this series has just been so important to the life of our church. I think it's important to people that you know. I hope you share it, not because I'm some great preacher or anything like that, because I think people need it, though. I think people need to know that they are not alone. I think that's the biggest thing. I think a lot of times we think I'm the only one struggling with this, right? And when you're in those seasons, you need to know people are with you. And I think one of the greatest things about our church is that we can be open and vulnerable with each other. We can share so that we know that we're walking in this together. I'm walking in the same things you're walking with, right? Like I'm battling these same things daily. Right? So you're not alone. I'm not preaching from some elevated spot of like, oh, look how holy I am. I have no problems, no voices in my head. I got lots of voices in my head. If you guys want to know, they're telling me all kinds of crazy things. Like, I want Chipotle right now. Like, that's a good voice, right? They got free delivery today. So if you don't want to go out, get that free delivery. But anyway, but it's good to know you're not alone. It's good to know that people are with you. And so I hope that this has been good these last 4 weeks. And this morning, we're going to wrap it up. And so we've talked about insecurity. We started off this series by talking about where do we find our identity. I think everything stems from our identity. If you don't know whose child you are, if you don't know who you belong to, then you can't begin to attack the things that are influencing you. And so we talked about insecurity and knowing where we find our security, who our identity is. And then we talked about fear and how a lot of our actions and reactions, the things that we do, the way we act, it all stems out of fear. This idea that you're losing control, that you can't have control over your life. And so we offer that back to God and we walk in faith. And so then last week, we wrestled with condemnation. And if you weren't here last week, you should go back and listen to that series. I think John did a good job hitting on it this morning. But this idea of like, God didn't design you to get steamrolled over your past, right? You weren't just, God didn't say like, look at you, you're saved, and now I'm just going to drag you through it, right? You ever been around someone when like you've wronged them and you say I'm sorry and they don't quite want to let it go? Like they're like, oh, I forgive you, but I'm going to remind you about what you've done 50,000 times and just kind of drag you around through it. And that's not forgiveness, right? When you forgive, you release, right? Like it's forgotten, it's let go of. And I think God does. I know God does that. And so we aren't called to live in condemnation, but we are called to holiness. And so there is a part of conviction and becoming more like Christ and how we are called to be better and to grow and to listen to the Holy Spirit. And so we've been wrestling through this and we figured out how do we overcome these voices and how we don't isolate ourselves. And Anybody ever get lost and you just like, your pride takes over and you just keep getting more and more lost, right? It's the worst thing you can do not to ask for help. And men, we are horrible at this, right? We don't want to admit we need help or we don't know how to do things. So we're like, I got this, I can figure it out. Like, guys, you will take apart your whole vacuum cleaner, and you might not be you are the least handy person in the world. You think, I'll just figure it out. I got it. And, I've taken apart the whole front end of my car. I am not a mechanic, but I'm like, I got it. I'll figure it out, right? I was in New York City. Anybody ever been to New York City? Ridden the subway? Ridden the subway? The subway, if you don't know what you're doing in the New York subway, can be one of the most challenging things you'll ever face in your life. And there are trains going all over, and you think, oh, I'll just uptown, downtown, got it figured out. But there are stations with, like, levels. Like, so if you go to the wrong level, you'll end up in, like, Long Island somewhere, and you're trying to get to Broadway. And so I remember I went to New York City, and I had this attitude, like, I got it figured out, right? Like, I don't need anyone's help, right? It's that isolation mentality. And I'm like, I'm going to get dinner, where I was there with I worked for a nonprofit, and I said, I'm going to go out and get dinner. I'm a pro at New York City. I've been there a whole 5 hours. I'm like, I'm a New Yorker, right? Like, I don't need a backpack. I'm not going to look like a tourist. I'm just going to take on the subway. I swiped my card, and I'm walking, and all of a sudden, I took the wrong staircase, and I got on the wrong train, and I was trying to get to Union Square, and I literally ended up, they're like, next stop, Long Island. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, this is, and so, in my pride, I got off at the next stop, I ran around. Let me tell you, a 10-minute subway ride ended up taking me 2.5 hours. Why? Because I thought that I could handle it on my own. I thought, I don't need anyone's help. And I think that attitude is one of the most destructive voices or mentalities that you can have in life. God did not intend us to walk alone. You weren't intended to walk through the struggles you have alone. Young people, right? Like, I love you guys sit up here every week, my favorite thing. And it makes me feel like I'm a youth pastor still a little bit. Claire, you're old, you're an adult now. But I love it. Like, young people, you guys are in an age where you think, like, I don't need anybody else. I don't need guidance. I can do this thing. I'm so smart. I got Google. Google will help me figure everything out. And you think, I don't need anyone. And I think if you build your life in isolation, when you become an adult, you will have so many destructive habits in your life. Some adults in this room, you are living in that destruction because you isolated yourself at a young age. And I think if we learn to lean in and say, let's come around it. Let's not look like fools. Let's get around this idea of togetherness and holiness and walking. And really, that's been the hope of this series. That you're not isolated, that these voices, like, that the enemy isn't just attacking you, Ethan. Like, he's not just picked you out and been like, Ethan, I'm just going to get... Like, no! Everybody in this room is dealing with fear. I don't care how old you are, how holy you are, how unholy you are, like how smart you think you are. You could have 10 doctorate degrees. I don't really care. You still struggle with fear. And so, as we've gone through this series and as we wrap this up, I think today is so important because today centers around your purpose. So we've talked about your identity. We've talked about your actions. We've talked about your past. And today we're talking about this idea of your purpose. And today I want to talk about discouragement. So we've had confessions throughout this series. And I think actually the slide is going to be wrong. It's going to say confession 3, but it's actually confession 4. And so if you can put that slide up. Our confession, what we're confessing today as believers is God says, I can. God says that I can. Every week there's been, what is the voice of God? What do we lean into? And so today's voice, today's promise is that God says I can, overpowering the lies of the enemy in your discouragement. How do we attack discouragement in our lives? Because some of you, the reality is you woke up this morning and you, just getting to church, you are already feeling discouraged, right? Your dog threw up everywhere, you fell walking out the door, you barely fed your kids. You're like, my life is a mess, I'm a hot mess today. It's a miracle that I got here. And you are battling the voice of discouragement, even coming to the house of God. And the reality is that all of us in some way, that togetherness, right? You're not alone. We all struggle with it. And Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, some of the great spiritual people, right, like of our age, Paul, people like Jeremiah. We talked about some of these, but there are actually recordings of Mother Teresa sitting down, like she cared in the worst place in the world, like helped orphans, and she loved Jesus. And she sat in a room, and they actually have letters where she wrote how discouraged she was, even in her ministry. Paul, it's recorded in Scripture, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but Paul actually said as he was sitting in prisons, he would cry out to God and say, God, like, where are you? I don't feel like what I'm doing is serving a purpose. Jeremiah, we talked about at the beginning of this series, was a failure. And so how did these people fight through discouragement? How do we take on discouragement? Because I think discouragement is the equivalent of playing a video game. Anybody remember Mike Tyson Punch-Out? Yes, Nintendo. Some of y'all are like, what's a Nintendo? And let me tell you, before you had Xboxes and PlayStations, we used to have to blow in plastic pieces and stick them in a machine. And there was a game called Mike Tyson Punch-Out. And some of y'all, I'm not like a huge boxing fan, but I'm a Mike Tyson Punch-Out fan. And let me tell you, Mike Tyson Punch-Out, you would be like cruising through the game, right? Just knocking, left hooking people out until you get to Mike Tyson. And you like feel like you're the champion, and all of a sudden you show up to Mike Tyson, and he's a monster in the game. Just shows up, and he will one punch take you out every time. And there was no like we save every level back in those days. Like when you lose, you start over again, right? There was no like we regenerate lives in boxing. It was like you got knocked out, you lost. Here we go through it again. And so I remember playing Mike Tyson, and you would feel so awesome, and then you get there, and this monster video game man would show up. It's like Mario. Maybe some of y'all, maybe Mike Tyson does a bad illustration, but Mario, right? You beat all these little bosses, and then you get to Bowser at the end. And he's just like throwing fire bombs at you, kicking you into the lava, like all these, like, he's just taking you out. Facing discouragement can sometimes feel like playing a video game. And you feel like you have these small victories. But what happens is we have these little victories until we get to the big boss, right? And it's like we show up, and discouragement will just creep in. It'll just stay silent. You beat one round, right? You beat the scrawny white guy, but Mike Tyson's coming to get you. And you're like, man, I'm the king of the world. I'm the best video game boxer ever. And so you're taking these small rounds, and discouragement won't creep in those small areas. It'll wait till you're feeling on top of the world. World's best mom, right? Like, I got this. Best dad ever. Best student. Like, I'm the king of Southview High School, right? Like, whatever you are, you feel like you're the champion, and then discouragement will find a way to slither its way into your life. And like a right hook from Mike Tyson, it will derail your whole game. And so how do we fight that? How do we be prepared for that? And how do we stay on the mission God has for us when discouragement slithers its way into our lives? And I think no one understood this more than Joshua in the Bible. This morning we're going to be in the book of Joshua, Joshua 1. And Joshua was Moses' right-hand man. Now everybody knows, like, the let my people go, parts of the Red Sea, fire from heaven, Moses, superstar, like superhero of the Bible, did like tricks with his staff, like all kinds of stuff, And Moses was awesome. Like he got the slaves out of Egypt, and the people of Egypt sinned, and so God said, Moses, you will never get to walk into the promised land, but you'll get to wander in the desert for 40 years. Seems like a bad deal, right? Like if you're Moses, you're not stoked on that like trade-off. And so Joshua was Moses' right-hand man. And so Moses gets to the end of his life, the end of the book of Exodus. And Moses is about to die, and God says, okay, Moses is about to die, now you guys get to go into the land I promised him. Man, Moses sounds so holy in the Bible about it. I would be so, I'd show up in heaven and be like, are you kidding me, God? I better get, infinity Skittles for all eternity, a hoverboard, and a lightsaber, if that were to happen to me. And be able to fly. And I want all the superpowers in heaven. And so Moses is dying, and God says, okay, here you go. Now you guys get to go in. Oh, and by the way, Joshua, you followed Moses, and now you're in charge of the whole thing. It's one thing to take over for a leader. It's another thing to take over someone who is reverend as a spiritual great, right? Imagine being like Billy Graham, when he passes away and someone's like, okay, now you get to take over for Billy. Oh, he did die, didn't he? It's okay. He's still alive in my heart. And but I want you to think about it. Imagine being one of his children, right? Your dad was Billy Graham. And they're like, okay, take over his ministry. The discouragement that would follow, and Joshua is no different. Joshua is ready to take over for Moses. God says, this is the one to lead all of Israel, right? You guys have been slaves. You're going into this land I promised. And Joshua 1 verse 9 starts with this. God is talking to Joshua. He says, this is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I love this because God almost hits all the voices in one sentence. He says, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. I'm with you. I've called you. God is not surprised by the discouragement. There are no secret left hooks in this game. God is prepared, and He says, I know what is about to happen in your life. I know the weight that you're about to feel, and you need to know who I am. And so He gives Joshua these words, and it's not just a feel-good Bible verse that looks good in Hobby Lobby on some plaque with fake flowers around it. It's a mission. It's the voice of God. It's God saying, I can, I will, I already have. See, the voice of discouragement has one purpose, one mission: to keep you cemented in the place. To keep you cemented in the lie that you're a failure. To keep you cemented right where you're at right now, and to never achieve the purposes God has for you. See, discouragement doesn't just hold you back mentally. It will keep you grounded from fulfilling your calling. That's so important. If you're taking notes, I think we have a slide of it. Discouragement doesn't just hold you back mentally. We think it's just a mental game, right? It doesn't just hold you back mentally. It will ground you from the calling God has for you. Joshua is stepping in to the shoes of Moses, his friend, his mentor. The one who had freed the slaves, the one who actually, Moses, when he went up on the mountain, only Moses could go and commune with God. And so this is the one Joshua is following up. And he had followed Moses, and he had saw his faithfulness. Joshua had been prepared for leadership. He knew where he was going, his calling. But discouragement will find a way in, even when you know the truth. Even when you know what is right and what is holy and what God said and who He says He is, discouragement will always find a way in. And we wonder sometimes why we're missing our calling in life. We wonder why we're missing opportunity. We wonder why we're missing greatness. And it's because discouragement takes a weak area. Maybe your energy is down low. Back to that video. I don't know why I'm on video games today. Probably because Sonic the Hedgehog came out in the movie theater. I don't know. But your energy is down low. You're beat up. And it will just find a way to just beat you down. Moms, let me tell you that have children. I'm a dad and I don't even know the struggle. But moms out there, discouragement will always attack you when you're at your lowest point. When you haven't slept enough, when you're wore out, when your patience is low. You will get hit with all the discouragement in the world in those moments. And it's not by accident, it's intentional. Because the enemy knows if I can get you to second guess yourself, I can get you to second guess your calling. And discouragement always wants to derail you from your calling. How many of you have an iPhone in the room? Anyone? iPad, iPhone? You got some kind of Apple device in your life. I would venture to say 99% of the people in this room, and probably everywhere, have some sort of Apple device somewhere. There's some of you like crazy Android fans. You're like, I'm not letting Apple have anything, right? Zach, he ruins all of our, leadership text because he's the one great text and throws it off. It drives me crazy. I was telling him to cut you out of text groups because you ruin it. And your wife can tell you anything you need to know. But the interesting thing about Steve Jobs, if you don't know who Steve Jobs is, he's the one who basically made Apple what it was. He's the founder of it. But if you know the Steve Jobs story, at age 30, he started this company in his garage, and it grew, and he made the Apple I computer, and everybody loved it, and it was great. But when he turned 30 years old, he was trying to take the company to the next level, and the leadership didn't believe where he was going. And so his own company sits him down in a conference room, and they fire him from his company that he started. They say, we don't believe in your leadership. We don't believe we're taking it. We're firing you from Apple. And so at 30 years old, Steve Jobs finds himself, the man who invented this company, out of his garage with no job, no company, nothing. He loses everything. If you want to talk about massive discouragement, try starting something and failing at it. And think of the voice that is there. And in all accounts, Steve Jobs was a failure in that moment. To get fired from what you started is one of the greatest failures I think you could have as an entrepreneur. And it says he spent the next 10 years and he spent time digging into other things. And so what happens is after 11 years of Steve Jobs being away from Apple, they realize we can't turn this company around. And so Apple actually crawls back to Steve Jobs and says, will you come back and help us? Will you come back? And what comes out of that meeting is the iMac, then the MacBook, and then Steve Jobs comes up with an idea for the iPhone, which most of you have in your pocket right now. Steve Jobs would have allowed discouragement to come into his life, to say you're a failure, you'll never be good enough, go find something else, go work at a golf course, right? Like go do another job. You should just give up, throw in the towel. If he would have given into the discouragement at 30, the iPhone would have never been invented. That was his baby. That was his brainchild. The greatest thing that he probably ever invented, more than computers, anything, will be that phone. It will go down in history as one of the greatest inventions ever. All because he learned how to silence discouragement. And I think the key in our lives is how do we learn to silence that voice? Because if we don't push through it, if we don't press through what is trying to hold you back, keep you cemented where you are, if we don't learn to lean into the right voice, if we give in to discouragement, you will miss your calling in life. And so Joshua finds himself in this same position. I imagine he buries his friend, and Moses is dead, and he's standing there saying, how do I do this now? Like I know Moses was grooming me, but how do I step into this? These are big shoes to fill. And so if you have your Bibles, Joshua 1:6, we're actually going to rewind from the verse that we just read. God says this. God views him where he's at. I want to go back to that isolation piece. Some of you think like you're alone in your brokenness and your failure. And it wasn't planned to do the prayer time this morning and that whole thing to happen, but I think it's God speaking to us today. That you aren't walking through this alone. There are people with you. And so God even is reminding Joshua in this story that he's not isolated. Joshua 1:6 says this. God comes to Joshua, just takes over, and he starts off Joshua's ministry by saying this. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Verse 7, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey my instructions, all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Man, what a powerful verse, right? Like, don't be distracted by what's in your side mirrors. Keep your eyes focused ahead. Man, if we could just conquer that, think how good. And if we could keep our eyes on the one who's leading us, that's a whole other sermon. And so, he says, don't look to the left or right, but keep your eyes focused ahead, and you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so that you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then you will prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God knows what you're going through. God knows that you feel like a failure, and He's not surprised by it. But what He's saying is, if you would lean into my words, I've already promised, I've already given you the tools of instruction, right? When this isn't like a magical book that Joshua carried around, it's the beginning chapters of this. It's the book of Genesis. Actually, he's saying, look at what I've given you. I think sometimes we view the Bible as this like magical book that we put on and I think it's the Word of God, but I think it's a book of it's how we know who God is, right? It's how we know the promises He's already spoken. And I talk to people all the time, and they're like, I don't really know God, or I don't hear God, and I'm like, are you in the Word? If you want to know God, then read God's Word. Because it's how we know who He is. And what He's saying is study my Word, study my promise, because the promises that I spoke over Moses, I'm speaking over you. And I think, church, today, the word God has for us is that these aren't just powerful words for Moses and Joshua and Jeremiah and Paul. It's the same promises God has spoken over these people. God is speaking over your life. And then when you begin to press into that, when you begin to understand the mission, when you begin to understand who He is, then you begin to silence the voice of discouragement, and it all starts with obedience. See, true joy is not determined by what happens to you, but what Christ is doing in you and through you. I think when you begin to find the source of your joy, when you begin to know the words of who is calling you, the one who has spoken over you. You know, I'm not picking on moms, but there's like a bunch of moms sitting up here. So, and I'm like, man, if you realize who God made you to be, when you're in that low moment, you have a foundation to grab a hold of, right? The Bible doesn't say you're never going to have low moments, you're never going to get discouraged, but what are you grabbing a hold of in those moments? What are you leaning into? And when you understand your calling and who God has called you to be, you find a joy in your purpose. See, Joshua understood the opportunity that he had ahead of him. The opportunity that God had given him. His ministry and his strength wasn't about him, but the mission God had called him on. The mission that God had said, I've called you to lead these people. I've given you everything you need. Walk in my purpose. And when you begin to understand you're a vessel, you're a compass to the Father, there's a joy that follows in your life. Jesus gives one mission before He departs to heaven. We really only have one commandment as Christians, right? I mean, Jesus gave two, but He gives us one job. He gives us one command. As the apostles are standing there and Jesus is going to return back up into heaven, He gives one mission to His people. He says, go into all the world and make disciples. Go into all the world. Go everywhere. He doesn't say go back to fishing on Sundays. That's your day to make disciples. He says go everywhere. In everything you do, point people to the Father. Let your life be a living sacrifice. Let it be a representation. Usher in the kingdom of heaven wherever you are. Your mission is to point people to Jesus. And when the voice of discouragement has one intention, to interrupt that, You have to press through and say, I wasn't called by a pastor. I wasn't called by my parents. I wasn't called by my spouse. I've been called by the Father in heaven. And when you understand who you've been called by, you can begin to say, God says I can. It's that confession, right? It's how you silence discouragement. When you know who has called you, you begin to repeat it. So when you're in that moment and you're like, I can't do it, God. I can't make it another day. I'm a failure. You just step back and you say, wait a second. God already said I can do it. God has already said that I'm capable, that He's already put it within me. That's why worship songs are so powerful. It's why we spend 30 minutes in worship. It's not because it's the church thing to do, but because these songs that we intentionally pick and we sing and we say this is an anthem for our community. It's a reminder. We're proclaiming who God is, right? We're preparing our hearts by saying, man, I don't know what I walked in with, but God, you are holy. You are mighty. You're powerful. God, you take dry bones and you bring them back to life. What a beautiful name Jesus is. There's no greater name. There's no rival to it. Do you understand the power of worship? You're channeling your heart in the right direction. When you sing these anthems of praise, it's not about feeling good or, stirring up the juju. It's not about any of that. It's about saying, God, how do I position my heart to be connected with who you are? Let me sing over top of my discouragement. I talk to people all the time that are like, oh, I'm just so depressed today. I just can't worship. I just need to sit in the back and just feel sorry for myself. And I'm like, if you're broken and depressed, man, there is no better time to worship because you need to remind yourself who God is. And so when we begin to channel our attention, when we begin to center our attention to say, God says I can do this, you don't need Facebook, right? You don't need a support group. You don't need all these people to vent to because you've already moved past. You've already said, I'm not defined by the voice of discouragement, by my failure. I'm defined by who God says He is. And I think so often we try to fix it ourselves. And we just step back and God's saying, I'm here. I'm waiting for you. If you would just acknowledge it's that obedience I talked about before, if you would just be obedient. I'm going to put the pieces together that you don't even understand. I can win this battle if you trust my plan. I can win this, but my son is obsessed with trouble right now. Remember the popper game? Right, we sit and play for hours. And when he was first learning, I would say, Logan, trust me, you don't want to go there. And he'd be like, no, I'm going there. And he'd end up, there's this warp thing that takes you across the board. And he'd hit the warp and go backwards every time. And I'm like, son, if you would listen to me, you will win the game. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it myself, right? It's like we're in this game of trouble, I think, sometimes, where we're just hitting the warp and we're going backwards because we want to stay in our dysfunction. We're used to it. We're actually more comfortable in our dysfunction than in the presence of God. Because the presence of God equals obedience. And when you learn to be obedient, you can begin to silence that dysfunction. You begin to move past it. You begin to push through. You allow God to begin to fix the brokenness in your life. And the key to that is the key to overcoming discouragement is allowing God to fill the gap. Here's the reality. I'm going to give you guys the end of the sermon right now. We're wrapping up. You are not good enough. You're not. You are born with a flaw. You are not good enough. You will fail. Some of you are like, this is the worst Sunday morning sermon I've ever heard in my life. You were born with a flaw in you, but you are made whole because of Jesus. And I think sometimes we look at that flaw, we look at that brokenness, and we try to fill it with everything that we can. And we fill it with money. We fill it with relationships. We fill it with people. We look at our lives and say, I'm not good enough. Joshua, I believe, the reason God starts off Joshua 1 with the most encouraging, chapter of the Bible, if you are ever feeling sad about your life, just go read Joshua 1. Because Jesus is giving Joshua the pep talk of life. Man, you are strong. It's like my son going out to play soccer. I'm like, you can do it. You're going to score 30 goals. And he's not going to, but I'm like, dude, go, son. God has given Joshua the ultimate pep talk. That you can go, you can do this. And I think sometimes we look at our lives and we know that there's this flaw in us. That we all have. Every single one of us. This gap in our lives that is like this void in our humanity and sin. And we look at it and we're like, I'm broken. So, man, maybe I'll put women into it, or maybe I'll put a relationship into it, or money, or food, or whatever. We try to fill this gap with all these earthly things. And the Bible says earthly things are fleeting. They fall away, they crumble. Your relationship that you're so in love with someone for, I don't care if you're married or not married, your relationship will let you down. It will expose the gap in your life. It will leave you broken and empty. Your children will let you down. Some of you parents need to hear that because your children are your life. Your children will let you down. Your job will let you down. Your bank account will let you down. Those degrees hanging on your wall will let you down. It will all fall away. And until we learn to let God fill the gap in our lives, until we allow God to come in and say, you are only strong and courageous because of my presence. Joshua wasn't capable to lead Israel, but he was capable because of what God had put in him. He was capable because of the one that was with him, the one that was walking with him, the one that was encouraging him. And when we learn to say, God says I can, and I know I can because he's with me, then you can be like a bunch of dysfunctional disciples, lost and broken, leading 3,000 people to Jesus. I love the book of Acts because you have all these disciples that were they denied Jesus, they failed Jesus, they didn't even recognize Jesus when he returned. They're so blind, they're so broken, and they go back to fishing, right? They go back to what they were comfortable. They're like, oh, fishing will fill the gap in our lives. And Jesus is just making breakfast on the beach. And they're like, oh, who's this guy? It smells like a good breakfast. And they realize that Jesus exposes himself to them. He says, look at me, I'm back. And you have all these guys, even Thomas, after Jesus says, he still doubts. He's like, I can't be Jesus. Let me shove my hands into your body. It's gross. He's like, I'm going to shove my finger in. Let's see if it's real. He doesn't even believe it. They're all failures. And Jesus goes back to heaven. He gives them this mission to go into the world and preach the gospel. And Peter, the one who denies Jesus 3 times, in the book of Acts, a couple chapters later, is standing in the middle of the city. And he leads 3,000 people to Jesus. It had nothing to do with his ability. It had nothing to do with what he was capable of. But he realized, I have this gap and fishing isn't going to fill it anymore. Only the Holy Spirit can. And I think when you allow God to fill the gap, when you allow him to come in and say, yeah, you are broken, yeah, you are impatient, yeah, you are angry, yeah, you have flaws, but you are made whole because of me. Your flaws don't matter. You aren't dragged through condemnation anymore. You're made whole because of me. I said you can. I've already defeated it. I've already made you whole enough. So this morning, as we wrap up this Voices series, as we wrap up this series on what defines you, what drives you, I think it's important for us to end here. Because I can give you all the tools to fight discouragement, and I can give you all the tools to fight fear and condemnation, and you can come forward and find healing and wholeness and lay it at the altar. But if you stand up from the altar and you just pick up all that garbage that you just laid there and take it with you, then you're missing the point. You're missing the point to say, God, I'm broken and I need you. My life is dependent on you. I don't want to be a church that's dependent on us. Because if it's dependent on me, we're going to fail. That's for darn sure. If it's dependent on John, Zach, if it's dependent on any person in this, let's just shut the doors and go home. Like, let's go get that Chipotle. Let's eat it. Might as well go and do something else. But if it's dependent on Jesus, if we're dependent on Him, if it's not up to our abilities, if we say, God, you're big enough, you've called us, you can do it, you can have that breakthrough. God says, I can, and I will. So as we close, I don't know what you're coming in here with, and I say that all the time, but I mean it. Like I hate the idea of a pastor getting up and like, I don't know what your morning was like. My morning was good. My kids ate their cereal before we left the house. That was a small win for me in my life. Like, my son has clean underwear on. We're doing good today. And but maybe your day is the opposite of that. I don't know what you're walking in with. But I know we all need Jesus. And maybe you walked in this place not even realizing you need Jesus, but as we're sitting here and you're saying, I'm tired of fighting the same battles over and over. I'm tired of dealing with that pit in my life over and over. I need His presence. God says I can, and I will. I will fight the battle for you. I will make a way when there doesn't seem to be a way. I will have the breakthroughs around the corner if you trust my word. Know me, follow me, and you will find healing. And so here's 3 things. If you want to take a picture of it, write it down. These are 3 things as we wrap up this series. And I think these I always say everything. They're good. So 3 things that will help you fight discouragement. 3 things that will help you battle the voices. And this can go for any of the voices. The first thing that you need to know. We're going to put those up. The first thing is you're doing better than you think you are. That's the first thing you need to remind yourself. You are doing better. You have more victory than you think you have. You are doing good, right? Like, God doesn't come to Joshua and be like, yeah, you kind of suck, but I'm going to help you out. He says, no, you're awesome. I've made you. I've prepared you for this. And so you need to know today, you are better than you think you are. The second thing is, maybe the most important, it's less about you than you think. Your life is less about you than you think. You are not as important as you think you are. You're not the center of the universe. God will still find a way, with or without you. It will be better with you, but He will still find a way, whether you're obedient or not. So you are not as important as you think. And the third thing is you matter more than you think you do. You guys are like, what, huh? You just said I didn't matter, and now you're saying I do matter. That's the point. Is you do matter. You are important. God needs you. God has a purpose for you. God needs you on the mission. The mission won't be as good without you, so don't give up. He needs you along on the way. But remember who you're giving glory to. Not yourself. It's not dependent on you. It's dependent on Him. And so this morning, if you want to stand with me, we're going to worship, we're going to end, and I'm going to encourage you this morning to do exactly what I talked about earlier. Some of y'all need to lift up some praise this morning. Some of y'all need to worship your way out of the pit. Some of y'all are standing in the furnace, right? The book of Daniel. You're standing in the furnace and you just need to worship your way out of the fire. Because you're not alone. He's with you. You need to lift it up. Some of you even after we had a prayer time this morning, you still have that. You're still seeing that wall. And you need to praise your way through that. Because God will make a way. I can always tell when God's moving in my life because crazy, weird things start happening to me that normally don't happen. Like I won't get a speech speeding ticket like for 8 years, and then all of a sudden I get like a ticket or something crazy, or like just weird stuff will happen. I'll be like, why is my shower leaking down the wall and there's a hole in it? Because everything in my life is about to go haywire. And some of you are in that, and you're like, man, my life is haywire. And God's saying, step into my presence. Quit trying to fix it on your own. I've already said I can. So let's do that this morning. If every head bowed, if you're here this morning, and maybe I mentioned it a second ago, but maybe you're living in that void. Maybe you've been trying to fill your life with everything. And as I talk about Jesus filling the gap, maybe you've never really invited the presence of Jesus into your heart to fill that void. And this morning, I don't want to go through service without asking, if you're here and you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, if you have a hole in your life and you would say, I need His presence. I don't even know what that means, but I want to take a step. I want to invite Him to fill that void in my life. If that's you, just put your hand up and put it back down. I want to pray for you this morning. I don't want to embarrass you. We're not going to call you out. I just want to pray for you this morning. God, you see your children. God, you see your people. God, you know their hearts. And God, you see every heart in this room. God, you know every head, every hair on their head. And God, right now, as those who openly say, God, I need your presence in my life. God, I've been trying to fill the void with everything else. I've been trying to self-correct. And God, I know the only way that I can get through this is by leaning into your presence. The only way I can be made whole is by trusting you. You died on the cross for me. You paid the price for my sins. I don't need to pay for it with anything else other than just trusting you. God, I trust you right now. And God, as they begin to trust you, God, I pray you begin to heal the parts of their heart. Heal the parts of their life. Make them whole. Give them new eyes. Let them know that they're not made to walk through condemnation. But God, they walk with a purpose. They don't have to remember their brokenness, but they need to know who they were created to be. And so, God, I ask right now that you would just begin to empower our church, empower this room. God, I pray right now that we would worship our way out of the pit right now. God, that we would praise you. God, maybe we're not in the fire. Maybe we're not in the pit. But God, maybe we just need to lift up your name because we know where we were. God, we know who we were. God, we know how broken we were. God, I pray that we would just lift up your name this morning. God, that we would just praise you. God, you are holy. You are mighty. You are good. And we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.